Imagine being 27 years old, driving home after a long day, and within minutes, your life is destroyed. Police lights flash behind you. A simple stop turns violent, and before you know it, you're dragged out of your own car, thrown to the ground, and slapped with charges you don't even understand. Not because of what you did, but because of who you are. This isn't just a story about resisting arrest. It's a story about resisting while black, and how one traffic stop became a life-altering nightmare. She was just 27 years old, tired but content, driving home on a quiet evening after finishing her shift. The radio hummed low, her mind already on dinner and the relief of taking off her shoes. Nothing about that night suggested her life was about to collapse. But then, in the rearview mirror, blue and red lights pierced the darkness. Her stomach tightened, because for a black woman, even a routine traffic stop feels like stepping into danger. She pulled over carefully, hands gripping the wheel the way she had been taught. Visible, steady, non-threatening. She had no weapons, no drugs, no reason to fear, except the history etched into her skin. The officer approached with a flashlight beam slicing through her window. His tone wasn't professional, it was commanding, almost hostile. License and registration. She complied, moving slowly, narrating her every move the way countless black parents teach their children to survive encounters with police. But compliance wasn't enough. The officer claimed she hadn't stopped quickly enough when he first turned on the lights. He accused her of being uncooperative, even as she sat still, trembling. Backup arrived. Another patrol car pulled in behind, its lights strobing across the street. Now there were two officers, their voices rising, orders overlapping. She tried to explain, her voice cracking with fear, but they didn't want explanations. They wanted control. One yanked open her car door, barking at her to step out. She froze, shocked, unsure what she had done wrong. That hesitation, those few seconds of disbelief, were all they needed to brand her as resisting. In an instant, hands grabbed her arms, dragging her from the driver's seat. Her knees hit the pavement, gravel biting into her skin. A neighbor's porch light flicked on, someone watching from behind the curtains. Humiliation mixed with terror as she pleaded, "I'm not resisting. Please, I'm not resisting." But her words were swallowed by the sound of cuffs snapping around her wrists. What should have been a minor traffic stop had become something else entirely, a public spectacle of violent escalation. And for her, it was the beginning of a nightmare she couldn't wake from. The street was quiet, but the chaos around her made it feel like a stage. Her body trembled as the officers forced her face first against the hood of her own car. The cold metal pressed into her cheek, and the weight of a hand pinned her down. She kept repeating the same words, desperate, panicked. "I'm not resisting. Please, I'm not resisting." But the more she begged, the louder their shouts became. One officer yelled, "Stop fighting," even though her arms were already locked behind her back, wrists burning in the cuffs. Another accused her of trying to kick, when in reality her legs were just struggling to find footing on the uneven pavement. Every move she made to breathe, every flinch from the pain, was twisted into evidence against her. By now, neighbors had gathered. Some stood on their porches, others recorded from a distance, cell phones raised like quiet witnesses. But the fear was clear. Everyone had seen how quickly things could turn deadly. They knew shouting out or stepping closer could mean becoming the next target. So they watched, silent, as this young black woman was manhandled in front of them like a dangerous criminal. Her mind raced. What would happen if they decided this wasn't enough? She'd seen the news, stories of people who never made it past the stop, whose names became hashtags. She thought of her mother, of how she'd raised her to be careful, to survive. She thought of her little sister, who looked up to her, believing she was strong. But right now, she felt powerless. When they finally yanked her upright, she could barely stand. Tears streaked her face, her breathing uneven. They shoved her into the back of the patrol car, slamming the door as if to lock away not just her body, but her dignity. The flashing lights reflected in the car window, each pulse a reminder that her world had shifted. Her crime wasn't running a red light. It wasn't reckless driving. Her crime, in their eyes, was hesitation. Her crime was fear. Her crime was being black in the wrong place at the wrong time. The ride to the station felt endless. Her hands were numb from the cuffs, her chest heavy with fear. Through the cage of the squad car, she tried to steady her breathing, but every time she inhaled, her body shook with the same thought. How did this happen? A simple drive home, and now she was trapped in a nightmare. At the precinct, the humiliation deepened. The officers booked her for resisting arrest and obstruction. They wrote in their reports that she had been combative, that she refused lawful orders, that she posed a threat. She couldn't recognize the woman they described. It wasn't her. She had complied, begged, pleaded, but in black ink on police forms, their version became the truth. She sat in the holding cell, her face streaked with tears, her hair a mess, her knees aching from the fall. Other women glanced at her, some with sympathy, others with the hardened detachment of those too familiar with the system. She whispered to herself, over and over, I wasn't resisting. Saying it aloud felt like the only proof she had left. By morning, word had spread. Neighbors who had witnessed the scene began talking. Someone uploaded shaky cell phone footage online. The video showed flashes of her body being yanked from the car, the sound of her voice crying out. For those who knew her, a young woman who worked hard, helped care for her family, never had trouble with the law. It was shocking. For others, it was just another headline, another black body against asphalt. Her family rushed to the station, desperate and angry. Her mother demanded answers, her voice breaking as she told officers she's never been in trouble a day in her life. She's not a criminal, but her words met the same silence that had met her daughter's pleas. That night marked a dividing line. Before, she was just another 27-year-old living her life. After, she was stamped with a label, defendant, resistor, threat. The system had already chosen its story, and it was only the beginning. The first time she walked into the courtroom, she felt like she was stepping onto a stage, but one where the script had already been written, and she was cast as the villain. At 27 years old, she should have been planning her future, working toward her dreams. Instead, she stood at the defense table, accused of crimes she never committed. Her charges were read aloud, resisting arrest and obstruction of justice. Each word felt heavier than the last, as if the system itself was determined to bury her under the weight of lies. She glanced toward the gallery, where her mother sat clutching a tissue, her eyes swollen from crying all night. The sight of her family's pain stung more than the handcuffs ever had. The prosecution painted a picture of her that was unrecognizable. They described her as aggressive, non-compliant, even dangerous. One officer took the stand and claimed she had tried to kick him. Another swore she had shouted threats. She wanted to scream liar, but her lawyer squeezed her arm gently, reminding her that anger in this room would only confirm the image they were creating. Her defense attorney fought back, pointing out that the officers' stories didn't align, that their reports were riddled with contradictions. But contradictions rarely mattered when the badge carried more weight than the truth. The jury watched the officers in uniform, their words echoing with authority, while her own voice was treated like background noise. The worst part was how the narrative shifted. She was no longer a victim of excessive force, but the aggressor. The system had turned her cries for help into evidence against her. And as she sat there, listening to strangers debate her freedom, she realized the terrifying truth. This wasn't about what happened that night. It was about what they wanted people to believe happened. The courtroom wasn't built for her justice. It was built for their protection. And no matter how loudly her innocence screamed, the walls of that room seemed designed to silence it. As the trial dragged on, it became painfully clear. the truth didn't matter. What mattered was whose version of the truth the courtroom was willing to accept. Her lawyer presented the shaky cell phone video captured by a neighbor, a video that showed her being dragged from the car, her voice pleading, "I'm not resisting." But the prosecution dismissed it, claiming the angle was inconclusive, that the video didn't show the full context. To them, the footage wasn't evidence. It was an inconvenience. Then came the witnesses. A neighbor who had seen everything tried to testify. He spoke of how she had complied, how she had been brutalized for no reason. But almost immediately, the prosecutor objected, questioning his credibility, nitpicking his distance from the scene, his line of sight, even his personal background. By the time he left the stand, the jury was left with doubt. Not about the officer's conduct, but about the citizen who dared to speak against them. Other potential witnesses never even made it in. Her lawyer had pushed to call more neighbors, but one by one, they were intimidated, told to stay out of it. Some feared retaliation. Some had jobs connected to city contracts and didn't want trouble. In the end, silence was safer than truth. Inside the courtroom, she felt invisible. Each time she looked toward the jury, she saw polite faces masking indifference. They didn't see her as a young woman with a family, a job, a life. They saw her through the lens the prosecution had crafted, a stereotype, a problem, a resistor. Her lawyer's arguments grew sharper, almost desperate, but even he knew the odds. He whispered to her after one brutal cross-examination, "They don't want the truth. They just want a conviction." And hearing it out loud broke something inside her. What began as a traffic stop had now become a carefully orchestrated trial, not of her actions, but of her identity. And as the walls closed in, she started to wonder, was there ever a chance she could win? The trial wasn't just draining her, it was destroying everything around her. Outside the courtroom, her life unraveled piece by piece. At work, whispers spread. Co-workers who once laughed with her in the break room now avoided eye contact. Some had seen the news headlines. Local woman charged with resisting arrest. The mugshot, snapped after a night of tears and bruises, replaced years of dedication and professionalism. Soon, her supervisor let her go, citing the need to avoid negative attention for the company. She lost her job, her income, and with it, the fragile sense of normalcy she had tried to hold on to. In her neighborhood, people were divided. Those who knew her, who had watched her grow up, stood by her, offering food, prayers, rides to court. But others, influenced by the narrative pushed in the media, whispered that maybe she had done something to provoke the officers. The doubt hurt as much as the outright accusations. It was the quiet betrayal of being judged by people who should have known her better. Her family carried the weight, too. Her mother's health declined, stress eating away at her. Her younger sister was teased at school, classmates mocking, "Your sister's a criminal." Even church, once a refuge, felt tainted. Some congregants hugged her tightly, others looked the other way. And then there was the loneliness. Nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in her mind. She would hear her own voice echo, "I'm not resisting," and wonder why those words weren't enough. The system had not only stripped her of her freedom, but also her identity. She wasn't the hard-working daughter anymore. She wasn't the reliable friend. She was the defendant. Every day, the trial painted her as someone she wasn't. And every day, she felt that version of her spreading beyond the courtroom, infecting every corner of her life. She realized this was more than a case. It was a label, and the label of resisting while black was heavier than the chains they put on her wrists. Her story was devastating, but it was not unique. Across America, thousands of black men and women find themselves in the same position, accused of crimes not because of what they did, but because of how they looked when an officer decided to stop them. Studies show that black drivers are stopped far more frequently than white drivers, often for minor infractions that don't lead to citations. According to one major study, Black drivers are about 20% more likely to be pulled over and nearly twice as likely to be searched, even though searches of white drivers are more likely to turn up contraband. These numbers tell a painful truth. Traffic stops are not just about safety. They're about suspicion, and suspicion is shaped by race. The phrase resisting arrest has become a convenient shield for misconduct. It's vague, subjective, and nearly impossible to disprove once it's written into a police report. If you flinch in pain, you're resisting. If you ask a question, you're resisting. If you hesitate out of fear, you're resisting. And when the accused is black, that label carries an even heavier weight, cemented by centuries of stereotypes about aggression and danger. Her case was a mirror reflecting these patterns. She had complied, she had pleaded, but her hesitation, her human fear, was twisted into evidence of resistance. And the courtroom, instead of questioning this pattern, amplified it. The officers' uniforms lent credibility, while her blackness made her words suspect. This isn't just about traffic stops. It's about a justice system that treats black presence as provocation. It's about communities where parents teach their children survival strategies for encounters that should be routine. And it's about how easily innocence is erased when the law decides to see you as a threat. Her story was one woman's nightmare, but behind it was a larger truth. In America, resisting while black isn't an act. It's a condition imposed on those who live in black skin. Her nightmare echoed the experiences of countless others whose names have appeared in headlines, often followed by hashtags that the world chants until the next tragedy takes their place. Each story follows a pattern: a minor stop, a sudden escalation, and a life derailed or ended under the accusation of resisting arrest. Take Sandra Bland, a 28-year-old black woman pulled over in Texas for failing to signal a lane change. The dashcam captured her calm compliance until the officer's aggression turned routine into chaos. Within days, she was found dead in her jail cell, her life cut short, her case forever marked by the same haunting phrase, resisting. Orlando Castile stopped more than 40 times in his life for minor infractions before being fatally shot in front of his partner and child during one of those so-called routine stops. His resistance was nothing more than existing while black and reaching for his wallet as instructed. These are not isolated events. They form a web of stories that reveal a systemic truth. The label of resisting becomes a weapon. It justifies violence, erases accountability, and paints victims as perpetrators. For the young woman at the center of our story, watching these cases unfold felt like watching her own reflection. She saw how easily the world could believe the worst about someone who looked like her. She realized that what happened to her wasn't an accident. It was part of a cycle, a template repeated across states, across decades. Her family clung to hope that the jury would see through the lies, but history suggested otherwise. Courts had long favored the narrative of law enforcement, even in the face of contradictory evidence. The stories of Sandra, Philando, and so many others weren't just tragedies, they were warnings. And for her, sitting in that courtroom, those warnings became her reality. She wasn't just on trial for her actions. She was on trial for her identity, in a system that had already judged her before she spoke. When the verdict finally came, her world seemed to freeze. The jury, after hours of deliberation, declared her guilty of resisting arrest. To them, the word of two officers outweighed her pleas, the video evidence, and the truth that lived in her bruises. At 27 years old, she carried a criminal record for a crime that was never real. But even as the weight of that decision crushed her, something inside refused to break. She realized her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every black man and woman who had been silenced by the same system. Every time someone said she should have complied or he shouldn't have resisted, her case stood as proof that compliance had never been enough. Her family fought alongside her, appealing the case, pushing her story into the light. civil rights groups took notice, sharing her ordeal as part of a larger movement to expose the pattern of wrongful charges against black drivers and pedestrians. She began to speak out, not as a victim alone, but as a survivor determined to stop others from suffering the same fate. The scars remained, lost opportunities, the sting of judgment, the trauma of being treated as less than human. Yet, with each interview, each rally, each retelling of her story, she reclaimed the voice that the courtroom had tried to erase. Her fight became symbolic of a broader struggle, to dismantle a justice system that thrives on bias, to rewrite laws that allow vague charges like resisting arrest to be weaponized, and to demand accountability from those sworn to protect. Today, her case is more than a headline. It's a call to action, a reminder that the phrase "resisting while black" is not just a tragic slogan, but a lived reality that continues to strip people of dignity, freedom, and sometimes life itself. And as she continues her fight, one truth remains unshakable. She may have been dragged from her car, but she refuses to be dragged into silence. Her story forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes survival isn't enough. She did everything right. Hands on the wheel, voice-steady compliance at every step. And still, she was dragged from her car, humiliated, and branded a criminal. At just 27 years old, she learned firsthand how fragile freedom can be when the system is stacked against you. Her life was split into a before and after. Before, she was a daughter, a worker, a young woman with dreams. After, she was the defendant, another black person punished for existing. But what happened to her is bigger than one woman's pain. It is a reflection of a system that weaponizes fear, that rewrites innocence into guilt, that silences voices with the stroke of a pen. And it leaves us with haunting questions. How many others have been buried under false charges? How many never get to tell their side of the story? How many lives have been shattered simply for resisting while black? This story is not just a tragedy. It's a call to awareness, a demand for accountability, and a reminder that silence allows injustice to thrive. If you felt the weight of her story, if you believe voices like hers matter, then this is your moment too. Share this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories that expose the truth behind wrongful convictions, racial injustice, and the deep failures of the system, subscribe to Black Crimes Diary. Because remembering her story means refusing to let it happen again.